Hi, my name is Adam Beach, and I am the Dean of the Graduate School at Ball State. We are so excited to welcome you to our third annual 3-minute thesis competition, which showcases our amazing graduate students and their fascinating research projects. The 3-minute thesis competition asks students to think carefully about how to communicate with people outside of their fields and people outside the university. The goal is to help others understand and hopefully to support and become invested in the students' research and wider academic enterprise of research and scholarship. This is a very hard task, one that 22 intrepid students took up in our preliminary rounds. You will hear today from those who made it through the preliminary judging, 10 brilliant students who will, no doubt, get you involved in and excited about their work. I love the 3-minute thesis competition, and I love the chance to showcase and celebrate our amazing students, who are such a central part of the Ball State community and its research, teaching, and service mission. Our campus simply would not be the same without the dedication, energy, passion, and enthusiasm of our graduate students. I want to also acknowledge that there is a tinge of sadness about the 3-minute thesis competition this year, as we have had to hold it remotely because of the awful pandemic we are living through. The live 3MT final events we've held in the past few years have been one of the highlights of the academic year for me, and I truly miss being with all of you in person to celebrate this event. I also want to acknowledge that the students presenting today conducted their research projects in what has to be one of the most challenging years in the history of American higher education. In many cases, graduate students were cut off for significant periods of time from their labs and other sites where they needed to collect data and conduct their research. Many students had to retool and reconceptualize their research projects, adapting on the fly as we all responded as a university to the COVID-19 pandemic. All of them had the challenges of dealing with the fear, isolation, and disruption caused by the pandemic, while also negotiating a time of significant unrest in our society. Obtaining a graduate degree has always represented a significant challenge in the best of times, and I think it has been unimaginably difficult for these students in these the worst of times. For that reason, I could not be more proud of all of our students who have endured through this past year. I could not be more grateful to all of our Ball State graduate faculty who have worked tirelessly with their students to adapt and complete their research projects. And I am also so thankful to all the students who participated in 3MT this year. By sharing their research with us, they give us a great sense of hope and much to celebrate. They help us keep focused on the good things that are still happening in our university and in our society. Their resilience, hard work, and passion for their research and for advanced learning reminds us of why we are here, why Ball State is so important, and why we must keep moving forward with the knowledge that our collective work as a university community is making a significant difference in these dark days. Before we get to the program, I want to thank all those who helped pull off this year's modified 3MT competition, especially our faculty advisor and MC, Nathan Hitchens, as well as Courtney Quinn and Michelle Miller from our graduate school team, our Associate Dean Stephanie Simon-Dack, all of the faculty who helped in the preliminary judging, and our partners Ted Buck in UMC, and Jeff Bowers and Paul Brown in University Media Services. Thanks to all of you for helping to showcase the work of our students.
My name is Nathan Hitchens. I'm an assistant professor here at Ball State University in the Department of Geography, and I'm one of the faculty involved in the 3-minute thesis. So, a little bit of history behind the 3-minute thesis. It was developed by the University of Queensland, and at that time in Australia, they were undergoing a severe drought, and residents were needing to conserve water. So many used 3-minute egg timers as a way to time their showers. Well, after one of such 3-minute showers, the dean of the graduate school at the University of Queensland had an idea. Why not see if we can challenge our students to describe the entirety of their research in just 3 minutes? So in 2008, the first 3-minute thesis was born. And the next year, it was promoted to other Australian and New Zealand universities. Then in subsequent years, the University of Queensland began hosting a multinational 3-minute thesis competitions. Now, the 3-minute thesis is held at more than 600 universities and more than 65 countries across the world. So let's take a look at our preliminary judges. So we had a preliminary round of these competitions where these judges split up and evaluated the 22 participants, and I'll show you in a minute what the criteria were on which they evaluated them. But first I want to acknowledge these judges for their hard work. So first, Catherine Denker from Communication Studies, Michelle Glowacki-Dudka from Educational Studies, James Johnson from Kinesiology, Melissa Holtzman from Sociology, Brad Fleener from Kinesiology, Sandeep Rayat from Chemistry, Carol Friesen from Nutrition and Health Science, Stephanie Simon-Dack from Psychological Science, and Jackie Buckrop, Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs. We had 22 students submit videos for our preliminary rounds, and those judges that I just introduced reviewed a subset each of these 22 students, and from those we narrowed it down to 10 finalists that will be featured tonight. We'll get a chance to see all 10 finalists' videos, and at the conclusion of our event, our winners will be announced. Let's go over the rules for the competition. So the main rule is that there is a strict 3-minute time limit. In addition, they can use a single static PowerPoint slide. So there can't be any animations, music, transitions, pop-ups, just one single PowerPoint slide. Also, no additional props. So you're not going to see anyone with a beaker or a funny hat or anything like that. No props, just the speaker and their slide. And of course, presentations are in spoken words, so you'll see no poetry, no songs, no performances other than just standard spoken dialogue. And the criteria on which our judges evaluated all of those 22, as well as our 10 finalists, is divided between two categories. The first is comprehension and content. So how well was the research introduced? So did they provide enough background? Did they explain why it was significant? How well was the research design explained? So did you get a good sense of the methods they used for conducting their research? What about the results and conclusions? Were those described well? Did you get a sense of what they got out of their research? And then the next category is engagement and communication. So how well did the presenter capture and hold your attention as well as the judge's attention? How well did the presenter make their work comprehensible? So did they use a lot of jargon, a lot of terms from within their discipline that the common person might not be familiar with? And how well did the PowerPoint slide enhance the presentation? So that's an integral part as well. So that PowerPoint slide should be providing something to complement what they're talking about. So that's the judging criteria. Now let's meet our 3 judges who judged the finalists that we're going to see tonight. You've already met Adam Beach, who's the Dean of the Graduate School. Dr. Beach is a professor of English and earned his PhD from SUNY Buffalo. He served as an administrator in Ball State's English department for 10 years, including a 3-year stint as a department chair. Along with 15 published or forthcoming articles on nationalism, slavery, and colonialism in 18th century British literature, he co-edited a collection of essays invoking slavery in the 18th century British imagination. He also co-founded the Digital Literature Review, immersive learning project. Dr. Beach has worked closely with many master's and PhD students and is thrilled to help support graduate education and graduate students in his position as Dean of the Graduate School. We also have Susan McDowell, Vice Provost for Research. In addition to Vice Provost for Research, Dr. McDowell is professor of biology. She earned her PhD from the University of Cincinnati and was a postdoctoral fellow at Lilly Research Laboratories in Indianapolis. At Ball State, she taught within the biotechnology program for 15 years prior to her current role and has worked with more than 50 students in her research lab. These students are co-authors on publications, have received their own internal and external funding, and most are pursuing and sustaining careers within the biotechnology field after graduation. And finally, we have Jennifer Mearns, Ball State's First Lady. Mrs. Mearns holds a Bachelor of Science from Bryant University, where she served for 9 years on their Board of Trustees, including 3 years as Vice Chair. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in executive recruiting and talent acquisition, having started her search career as a partner with Teamwork Consulting, a boutique executive search firm specializing in sports marketing industry. Mrs. Mearns founded JPM Consulting Services in 2003, which provides executive recruiting, talent acquisition, talent assessment, and general organizational consulting to a wide variety of clients. She actively serves on a number of not-for-profit boards, focusing on education and children and families in need. Tonight's awards, which will be announced at the conclusion of our event by Dr. McDowell, include first place, which will receive $1,000 and will represent Ball State at the Midwest Association of Graduate Schools, second place, which will receive $700, and third place, which will receive $500. First tonight, we have Jeffrey Miller from Architecture. Jeffrey currently resides in Arlington, Virginia, but was born and raised in a small town in northwest Indiana. He earned his undergraduate degree in political science from Indiana University Bloomington and is currently completing his master's degree in architecture with a certificate in sustainability here at Ball State. Jeffrey's career aspirations are to work in various fields pertaining to sustainable design. And tonight he's going to be speaking on reimagining the American cemetery, conservation and common sense.
Sustainability is a sexy topic when you're alive, but what happens when you're dead? In this country, you're either buried in the conventional way or cremated. Conventional burial often involves embalming fluid that replaces your blood to preserve you in a lifelike state for viewing. You're laid in an expensive casket and buried in a concrete vault to keep those poisonous fluids from leaching into the groundwater. This costs around $10,000. Today, most people are cremated because it's less expensive, but cremation is not the sustainable solution many think it is. Incinerating your body and casket takes the energy equivalency of about 20 gallons of fuel. Both practices subtract from nature and are excessive. And what about the cemetery? Basically, you have one option: the type of cemetery that's overly manicured, sprayed with pesticides and fertilizers, and void of wildlife. Once the cemetery is full, it may fall onto the taxpayers to maintain it or let it decay. So what's the answer? A third option, usually referred to as natural burial. This involves burying the person without poisons, concrete, or non-biodegradable materials. This method recognizes that death is a natural part of life. Natural burial can be taken one step further to conservation burial. This is natural burial that takes place on land set aside for conservation. Unfortunately, only a handful of these sites exist in the US. Instead of contorting nature into a conventional cemetery, let Mother Nature be the cemetery with its forests and meadows. My proposal imagines what a conservation cemetery could be. I chose a site next to the Chesapeake and Ohio National Historic Park in Maryland along the Potomac River. The idea is to pick an area adjacent to protected land to further support its unique ecosystem. And how does architecture play a role in this? After all, that is what I'm studying. The answer is exactly what I'm exploring. Specifically, how can we celebrate the lives of loved ones and friends in a more meaningful way than choosing from a list of funeral homes, which tend to be next to strip mall parking lots, the highway, or car dealerships? The site matters and the buildings matter. These spaces could serve multiple functions. They could host funeral services or community or community events. They could house collections that feature the history of the local area and the lives of the people buried there. And they could serve as an education center for teaching conservation. How can we use architecture and design to promote conservation burial as the common sense solution to our unsustainable burial practices? I plan to find out.
Next, we have Gabriella Fluhler from Environment, Geology, and Natural Resources. Gabriella is a Muncie local who earned her undergraduate degree at Ball State before leaving to earn her master's degree at Indiana University. She returned to Ball State to work toward her doctorate, where she is researching science education and the isolation of novel antibiotics from the dairy environment. In her free time, Gabriella enjoys reading, being outdoors, and spending time with her 5-year-old daughter and fiancé. Tonight, she's talking about addressing the antibiotic crisis through transformation of undergraduate microbiology curriculum.
The CDC estimates that we will see 10 million deaths annually by the year 2050 from multi-drug resistant bacterial infections if new antibiotics are not isolated. This is more annual deaths than those from cancer and heart disease combined. Historically, antibiotics are somewhat of a medical miracle, curing bacterial infections that are otherwise deadly. They quickly became very popular, used not only to treat active bacterial infections, but prophylactically as well. But even since the first antibiotic discovery, that of penicillin by Alexander Fleming in 1928, we have been warned about bacteria potentially developing a resistance to antibiotics. And sure enough, they have. Bacteria are rapidly evolving mechanisms against which to fight back against antibiotics, one of our most valuable medical weapons in the war against pathogenic bacteria. Many antibiotics that once worked quickly and effectively don't even touch those infections now. We're seeing more and more deaths from what were once very treatable infections, now untouchable by most of the antibiotics on the market. The need to develop new antibiotics is therefore an urgent one, but most pharmaceutical companies have stepped away from their antibiotic discovery programs. This is because there is significant money and labor involved in compound discovery and development, only for new antibiotics to be used sparingly, as a last resort against multi-drug resistant infections only. So we must get creative with how we can identify new antibiotics. For my research, we have created a classroom model for antibiotic discovery that not only contributes to a solution to this crisis, but also completely transforms the undergraduate majors microbiology learning format here at Ball State. This is a sequence of course-based undergraduate research experiences, or CURES, that span 2 semesters of courses, which we have named the Cure+1 model. In this model, we will have first semester microbiology students write hypotheses, collect environmental samples from local dairy farms, isolate bacteria and fungi, test the microorganisms for antibiotic activity against some of the most important pathogens, and identify the genus and species of origin of the novel antibiotic compounds. Second semester bacteriology students will then confirm these findings, isolating the compound that causes the antibiotic activity and identifying it using chemistry methods. This work by the students is also publishable. Students will work both semesters to compose a manuscript for publication, which they will co-author, something most of them will not have had the opportunity to do otherwise. Our Cure+1 model will not only allow students to directly contribute to the greater body of scientific knowledge, but it will also provide valuable real-world research experiences to students. These experiences will provide significant benefits to students compared to traditional classroom models while increasing retention in the STEM disciplines. This will also provide unique learning opportunities to students and teach them about science through the process of truly doing science. We will show them how they can step up where pharmaceutical companies have failed us, and how they can help save the world from 10 million annual deaths, one compound at a time.
Our next presenter is Natalie Brooks from Speech Pathology and Audiology. Natalie is a third-year Doctor of Audiology student from Fishers, Indiana. Along with conducting research on diabetes prevention education, she has previously assisted with auditory processing research in the Department of Speech Pathology and Audiology. She hopes to one day work at a university where she can teach classes and supervise students in a clinical setting. Tonight, she's talking about establishing the audiological role in diabetes treatment through community-based diabetes prevention education.
Are you 40 years old or older? Are you a man? Have you been diagnosed with high blood pressure? Do you have an immediate family member with diabetes? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you may be at risk for prediabetes, a health condition that affects 88 million individuals in the United States. Of the 88 million, 90% of individuals don't know they have it. Prediabetes is when someone has high blood sugar levels, but not high enough to be considered diabetes yet. A pre-diabetic individual may eventually develop diabetes, which should raise serious concern because diabetes can affect an individual's pancreas, kidneys, nerves, eyes, and ears. Yes, even our ears. Our ears help us with hearing and balance, and a diabetic individual is more likely to have hearing loss and/or problems with unsteadiness. Fortunately, the CDC has a nationally recognized diabetes prevention program, or DPP for short, to help pre-diabetic individuals change their lifestyle by eating healthy and exercising regularly. So, the purpose of my classmate Keith Rogers and I's research study was to look at pre-diabetic patients that went through the 16-week-long DPP and assess their balance function at the beginning and end of the course. Our hopes were to see that with improved lifestyle and weight loss, balance function would also improve. So first, we both got certified to teach the DPP, and then each week we taught all of our participants the weekly content. If a participant wanted to be included in our research study, he or she would come to the balance lab on campus so that my partner or I could administer the sensory organization test, which is what you see in this picture. This test looks at our whole balance system. So our balance system has vision, it has the somatosensory system, which is our legs and our feet, and it also has our vestibular system, which is our inner ear. This test generates an overall equilibrium score in comparison to same-aged peers. So when an individual is in this machine, the floor will move, the visual field will move, and all of this is to help us analyze if an individual is using the different parts of their balance system appropriately. We are still collecting data, but we do have some individuals that have successfully completed the 16 weeks and the pre and post test. All participants lost weight and saw improved equilibrium scores. Although it is too early to tell whether or not these results are clinically significant, my partner and I hope that as we continue our research, we would see a direct connection with diabetes prevention education and improved balance function. We also want to make it known that audiologists can be a part of prevention education for diabetes. 88 million individuals have the opportunity to prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes by just changing their lifestyle. We will continue to work in our community to help improve that number. Thank you.
Next is Joanna Daniam from Architecture. Joanna is from Nigeria. She is currently working toward her master's in architecture, and she hopes to contribute to the advancement of social and environmental justice through her designs. Tonight, her presentation is on returning housing to our urban centers, a new path for underutilized offices in a post-pandemic world.
Today in many cities, offices and other commercial spaces are vacant or have been abandoned. Take Indianapolis, for example. We see an increased vacancy rate of 16.2% in its office market in 2020, which is a slight increase from 2019. Now, in recent times in our experience in a global pandemic, we're entering a period of change in how we learn, live, socialize, and work. 85% of companies have accelerated digitization for employee interaction and collaboration, making it easier for employees to work remotely. As a result, 41% of employees will likely continue to work remotely post-pandemic. With many people working remotely, we're having to rethink and reconfigure the workplace, and with that comes endless possibilities for revitalization. In the foreseeable future, post-pandemic, working from home will become the preferred choice for many as people become accustomed to alternative work patterns. So what then will happen to these spaces? What will happen to the vacant or underutilized workplace environments post-pandemic? These vacant spaces create an opportunity to adapt these unused buildings for a new use. These buildings will no longer meet their intended purpose, especially now in this detached working environment. So why not repurpose them? Now in society today, many are facing widening inequality when it comes to the housing market. The market demand for housing is high, but the supply is low. While housing costs are steadily increasing, the unemployed and low-income citizens are continuously finding it difficult to find affordable housing to meet their needs. Today, 40 million Americans cannot afford their homes, paying as much as 50% of their income on housing, which is a lot higher than the recommended 30%. What we have here is an ever-growing housing issue that needs to be addressed. For this reason, my thesis considers the ongoing global pandemic and how an existing underutilized office space can be repurposed into usable space for mixed-income housing. By exploring basic housing issues, we can provide a solution by creating architecture that serves the people who need it the most. This means creating a new housing model that is equitable in access with the ability to live, learn, and work from home. One of the main drivers for my project is achieving social and environmental justice through sustainable and affordable architecture. The idea is to advance social justice through design by addressing economy, environment, and equity. Everyone has a right to decent, safe, and affordable housing. My development of a mixed-use and mixed-income property will be part of the solution. The goal is to address this lack of housing within specific neighborhoods and create a catalyst for change in the future of housing developments across the city. Thank you.
Next is Lilly Schwab from Communication Studies. Lilly is a master's student in the Communication Liberal Arts and Science track from Noblesville, Indiana. Their research interests center rhetoric of the body, pop culture discourses, performance, resistance movements, corporeality, and specializes in fat studies. They aim to continue teaching communication studies and are considering getting their MFA in theater. Lilly holds Indiana Forensics state champion titles and national champion titles from undergraduate years competing on the speech team. Their research has been presented at the Organization for the Study of Communication, Language, and Genders Conference. When they're not researching, Lilly likes to spend time with their two cats. Tonight, Lilly's going to talk about It's Time for a Nap. Tricia Hersey calls for rest to resist the grind.
I've learned a lot in grad school. Befriend your cohort, always have snacks for seminar, and the work is never done. Why do grad students always think that we are not productive enough? What I have learned is our guilt goes way beyond campus. This urge is a result of our collective workaholic culture, known as the grind or the hustle. This narrative promises if we just optimize our lives, we can have it all. But what if it's all a scam? What if grind culture actually leads to terrible cycles of burnout and emotional destruction? Is there another way? My thesis examines Tricia Hersey's answer. Hersey, otherwise known as the Nap Bishop, has been preaching rest as resistance for years. My thesis asks, how does Hersey's organization, the Nap Ministry, challenge grind culture? And how can bodies communicate resistance? The Nap Ministry asks its followers to consider rest and sleep deprivation as a racial and social justice issue. She believes centering rest can push back against toxic systems of capitalism and white supremacy. My research, a rhetorical criticism, examined texts from the Nap Ministry's Instagram, Twitter, and blog posts. The Nap Ministry can be understood as a case study that counters grind culture. The Nap Ministry's social media uses rhetorical strategies similar to Black religious leaders to persuade her followers. She utilizes both spiritual terminology and a prophetic persona when talking about their rest, leisure, and free time in the same way they would cherish something divine, like prayer. Hersey does this by titling herself as a bishop, calling her followers congregation, and calling social media detoxes her Sabbath. The Nap Ministry also strategically reconfigures our view of bodies, especially Black bodies, from a tool and machine for capitalism to something holy, divine, and magical. Her work asks, how will we create a liberated future if we're constantly exhausted? It's clear our relationship with work has never worked for workers. Tricia Hersey's project is about more than naps. A year into the global pandemic, it is clear that we are tired. Instead of attempting to write the next great American novel or turning our hobby into a side hustle, what we might just need is rest.
Our next presenter is Brianna Halloran from Nutrition and Health Science. Brianna is originally from Northwest Indiana and lives in the Indianapolis area while she finishes her studies and dietetic internship. Now in graduate school, she has a strong interest in researching maternal and infant nutrition and plans to work with these populations after becoming a registered dietitian. Brianna is using the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System dataset to perform research regarding maternal vitamin supplementation, which she and her colleagues plan to publish within the next year. Her presentation tonight is Postpartum Depression and Preconception Vitamin Supplementation, an analysis of the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System.
Sadness, anxiety, hopelessness, thoughts of wanting to hurt yourself or your child. These are just a few of the symptoms women who suffer from postpartum depression may experience. This major mood disorder begins after the birth of a child and can last up to 2 years if left untreated. Not only does this disease impact the physical, mental, and emotional health of the mother, but also the short and long-term well-being of the child. You might be wondering why a future dietitian is discussing a mental health disease. What does this have to do with nutrition? Well, I'll tell you, there is no one cause of postpartum depression, and many potential risk factors and pathways are still being studied, including the beneficial effects of vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, selenium, zinc, and certain B vitamins due to their anti-inflammatory actions and regulation of the feel-good neurotransmitters serotonin and dopamine, which have been linked to preventing depression. Many typical prenatal vitamins or multivitamins for everyday use include these nutrients. Most studies examining supplementation and postpartum depression focus on women during pregnancy and after pregnancy, but studies in the pre-pregnancy period are lacking. My thesis delves into the data from the CDC's Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System, also known as PRAMS, to evaluate the association between the supplementation of vitamins in the month before pregnancy and the development of postpartum depression. I chose the 2016 to 2018 PRAMS dataset because it provided a sample of 108,000 new mothers, representing 83% of the live births in the United States. The data showed that 1 in 7 women had postpartum depression, and only 48% of women consumed a vitamin supplement in the month before pregnancy. After controlling for other variables in a logistic regression, I found that women who took a supplement in the month before pregnancy had significantly lower odds of developing postpartum depression than those who did not consume a supplement. My analysis shows a protective effect of vitamin supplementation in the pre-pregnancy period, warranting more in-depth research to be conducted on this understudied population. Analyzing factors associated with postpartum depression and vitamin supplementation using this data is beneficial for healthcare practitioners, including dietitians, to improve preconception and prenatal care. Dietitians are integral in educating women on nutrition and pregnancy outcomes. By gaining a better understanding of the role of vitamins and other nutrients on postpartum depression, we can help to reduce the odds of women who develop postpartum depression, so the happiest moment in their lives remain the happiest moments. Thank you.
Next, we have Sarah Espinosa Rep from English. Sarah currently resides in Anderson, Indiana, where she completed her undergraduate degrees in psychology and English at Anderson University. At Ball State, she is finishing her Master of Arts in English Literature with the intention of pursuing her doctorate in literature in the coming years. Her research focus while at Ball State has been in disability studies with a focus on aging, the anomalous body, and waste. Sarah presented a short fictional piece at the Making Literature Conference held by Taylor University in 2019. Since then, she has taken time to develop her critical approach to literature, as well as teaching freshman writing here at Ball State. Tonight, she's going to talk about depictions of deafness and disability across adaptations of Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
From the early 1800s to the turn of the 20th century, Western views of deafness and deaf peoples were dehumanizing, stigmatic, and often cruel. Early on, the deaf community was seen as, and I quote, a great calamity in need of fixing, and as set apart from other disabled peoples due to the idea that as a linguistic minority, the deaf must be primitive, animalistic, and irreligious, and due to stigmas surrounding the use of sign language, incapable of complex thought or even education. Now, obviously none of these things are true, and we've come a long way since then, which is great. But if everything is getting better, why are canonically disabled characters in literature still coming up able-bodied in television and movie adaptations? For instance, how many of you are familiar with The Hunchback of Notre Dame? How many of you know that Quasimodo is deaf in the original novel? I'm guessing quite a few of you didn't know, and to be honest, neither did I. And that's the problem. Within my thesis, I wanted to look at this occurrence on a micro scale, focusing my attentions on a single literary work and 2 subsequent adaptations, one where the characters represented accurately, and one where their disability is erased. I chose The Hunchback of Notre Dame, including Hugo's original novel, the Disney film adaptation where Quasimodo is hearing, and then finally the Fifth Avenue theater production where Quasimodo is accurately portrayed as deaf. In doing so, I wanted to examine the ways that the termination of Quasimodo's deafness interplayed with the story's intense themes of communication, isolation, and community, all of which are present in both the novel as well as in the history of deaf culture at large. The trivial lives of fictional characters may seem small to some, but as is the case with most things literary, what is proffered is rarely the real conversation at hand. Indeed, one literary character's deafness may seem inconsequential if lost in translation, but consider with me. In each society, there's an unspoken but often strictly enforced set of rules that dictate who is seen as able and disabled, as normal and abnormal. Often things that are seen as disabled are seen as needing to be fixed, and things that are abnormal, normalized. By removing Quasimodo's deafness, of course it damages the original canon material, but it is also an act of normative society deciding what kinds of disabilities are palatable and which are not. This is not only an issue that needs to be called out, but one that needs sudden and intentional remedy. My thesis is part of that call. And just to let you know, Quasimodo is not the only one. Peeta from the Hunger Games is an amputee in the books, but not the movie, and the hero Hawkeye is deaf in the comics, but not in any of the subsequent film adaptations he's in. You can always rely on an English major to say the book is better than the movie. Well, in this instance, all I will say is that representation is better than erasure. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Kurt Greene from Architecture. Kurt is from Indianapolis and earned his Bachelor of Science in Architecture from Ball State in 2017. He then worked in Indianapolis for 2 years and returned to Ball State for his Master of Architecture. In the first year of his master's program, his design team received an honorable mention in the International Solar Decathlon Design Competition for a net zero home renovation. Moving forward from school, Kurt hopes to continue transforming historic buildings and houses to meet contemporary needs for equity and sustainability. Tonight, Kurt is going to present Transforming Participation in Historic Buildings.
Over the past several decades, cities have developed a new level of interest in preserving and altering historic buildings as part of their urban fabrics. This growing cultural interest has run concurrent to another urban phenomenon, diversification. While these two positive trends have happened simultaneously, their practical implications create a conflict because most historic buildings were not designed for diversity. This conflict is very prevalent in the Indianapolis Athenaeum, which is a late 19th century cultural center designed for the wellness of the local German-American population. Like most buildings of its time, it was designed for a homogeneous population. It was designed for separation of women and men, and, perhaps unintentionally, it was designed for people without disabilities. That can be clearly seen, for example, in the front facade, which has 3 entrances, but only one doesn't require the ability to walk upstairs. And even that entrance originally led to stairs on the inside. This is only one of the building's many failures at providing equitable participation, which is a big problem because around 26% of Americans live with a disability. Building codes have addressed some of these failures, like requiring that at least one entrance is wheelchair accessible. But achieving equitable participation in a building like this one requires far more than codes can ever prescribe. What would it take for a building designed generations before cities valued diversity to promote the wellness and inclusion of its entire community? Over the past few months, I have studied strategies that designers have used for achieving equity in new buildings, a process called universal design, and my question is how to retrofit those universal design strategies into old buildings. One group of designers defines universal design as enabling and empowering a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. Those interests are perfectly fitting for the Athenaeum because it was originally designed for human performance, wellness, and social engagement. Including the city's diverse population within these uses will therefore be an extension of the building's original mission. So, for my thesis, I will use the Indianapolis Athenaeum to explore how architecture can transform participation in historic buildings in order to harmonize rather than conflict our culture's diversity with its love for historic buildings.
Our next presenter is Ana Gabriela Calderon Cornejo from the School of Music. Ana was a doctoral student from Costa Rica majoring in piano performance with a certificate in entrepreneurial music. She recently completed her doctoral work at Ball State and now lives in San Francisco, where it is her ambition to continue performing and teaching career in combination with her certificate as an entrepreneur. Tonight, she'll be speaking on piano works by Latin American women composers born between 1850 and 1950.
When I started my studies, I was combing through different compilations looking for classical music from Latin America. I was immediately disappointed at how difficult it was to find music written by women. Clearly, this shouldn't have been surprising since historically women have had to face obstacles and deal with culturally imposed limitations due to their gender. However, the few women who challenge societal norms have been disproportionately left behind and were not brought into the digital era. Therefore, I found there was a great need to bring exposure to music written by Latin American women composers, especially those who were born between 1850 and 1950, whose music is at a real risk of disappearing. To even find music scores by women composers of this period, I had to dust off my detective skills, as these documents were not easily available to the public. They required for me to comb through international archives throughout North, Central, and South America. Connections with musicologists in Spain and South America also helped point me in the direction of people who could help. Most importantly, I was able to track down surviving relatives and family friends of many composers on social media. Even though it might have been a little stalkerish at first, I was amazed at how many people were supportive of this cause. These sources provided troves of documents, recordings, and relevant information for which I am extremely grateful. With these materials, I chose to focus my project on 5 composers who shared not only an amazing ability to tell a story with their music, but also demonstrated a strong sense of the mestizo or mixed culture that characterizes Latin American history. Using a music writing software, I was able to produce a collection of these composers' works that will be available soon to the public. This was not always particularly easy since, as you can see on the slide, many of these works were faded and deteriorating. I also work on learning to play and perform each composition in order to produce updated and professional recordings. Finally, I was incredibly fortunate to receive multiple opportunities to share this work, including nationwide conferences held by the College Music Society and the Music Teachers National Association. Currently, I am striving to rediscover and highlight many more of these pieces in order to bring exposure to many valuable women composers.
Next, we have Anya Eiker from the School of Kinesiology. Anya is from a small rural farming community in Australia called Bott. She completed her undergraduate degree in business administration and economics at Ball State, where she was also part of the field hockey team all 4 years. After graduating, she knew she wanted to continue working in the sport industry, so she decided to pursue her master's degree in sport administration. Anya's career aspirations are to work for a national governing organization to further the development of women's sports. And tonight, she's speaking on predicting retention of international student athletes.
Hi, my name is Anya Eiker, and as the accent might have given away, I'm from Australia. Prior to beginning my graduate degree in sport administration, I was a Division I field hockey player here at Ball State. My experiences as an international student athlete, as well as the experiences of others, has led me to my interest in this subgroup of students. Student retention is one of the most widely studied areas of college student research. However, the research body lacks the investigation of smaller subgroups of students. In the last decade, the number of international student athletes has nearly doubled to around 18,000, with around 13,000 of those competing in Division I athletics, an increase that shows how the NCAA's popularity is rapidly growing internationally. Methodologically, the international student athletes were limited to those who competed in a Power 5 conference, the highest level within Division I athletics, and played basketball, soccer, tennis, baseball, or softball. These sports were selected as they provided a range of team and individual sports, types of scholarships, and proportion of international student athletes per team. The literature review led to 9 variables identified as potential predictors of retention. These variables were gender, location, English language proficiency, specific sport, scholarship type, team or individual sport, if an athlete experienced a head coaching change, average win percentage, and final year win percentage. To determine which of these variables best predicted international student athlete retention through 4 years of college, I used a multiple linear regression analysis. Results indicated 4 of the independent variables that were tested were significant in predicting retention. First, English language proficiency of home country as a predictor is consistent with prior research, indicating language is an impactful barrier for international student athletes. Second, head coaching change is also consistent with research from multiple sources, indicating the impact of coaches on a student athlete's decision to leave. Third, specific sports were found to retain international student athletes at higher levels than others. And finally, the significance of the average win percentage is also supported in literature, highlighting how the retention of international student athletes is increased if their team is successful. Pragmatically, these results indicate it is important for both coaches and administrators to understand how these findings can help retain international student athletes. For example, administrators who understand that international student athletes and coaches have a strong connection could consider this point a factor in evaluating coaching candidates or contracts. Additionally, better retention can boost academic progress rate scores, the metric used by the NCAA to evaluate academic team performance, and reduce recruiting expenses. Furthermore, knowing that several factors outside of their control also impacts the retention of international student athletes is important. During losing seasons or for international student athletes with a lower comprehension of English, particularly on specific sport teams, increased retention programming would be highly recommended. Thank you.
Thank you to our 10 finalists. And now, Dr. McDowell to announce the winners.
Hello, my name is Dr. Susan McDowell, and I serve as the Vice Provost for Research. Mrs. Jennifer Mearns, Dr. Adam Beach, and I were the judges and determined the winners of the 2021 3MT competition. Our third place winner and recipient of $500 is Lilly Schwartz. Our second place winner and recipient of $700 is Brianna Halloran. Our first place winner, who will receive $1,000 and advance to our Regional Midwestern Association of Graduate Schools finals competition, is Ana Gabriela Calderon Cornejo. Congratulations to all of you. In our last minutes here, I want to share a story. I think this researcher's story is of profound importance to all of us who have the guts to do research. The story is about one of the researchers whose work led to both the BioNTech and Moderna vaccines. Back in 1995, after having been a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania for 6 years, Dr. Kate Carrico had been on her way to becoming a full professor when a number of grants did not get funded, and she was demoted. For most of us as faculty members, that would be bone-crushing. And out of pride and/or despair, most of us probably would leave the institution. She is quoted as saying, "I also thought maybe I'm not good enough, not smart enough." But she also is quoted as saying, "I tried to imagine. Everything is here, and I just have to do better experiments." And she did do better experiments. She began to publish, largely unnoticed, but the founders of BioNTech and Moderna did notice. In 2013, she was hired by BioNTech. When the pandemic began, those biotech firms were ready to take on this global despair, in large part due to the discoveries she had made early on with her collaborator, Drew Weissman. Why do I think that story is so important for a day like today? Well, many of us have been on both sides of events like today, on the honorable mention side and on the awardee side. I have thought at times that I had made it, only to have another bone-crushing setback. I think now we can think of Dr. Carrico. What are the better experiments, the learnings? I also am a bit haunted by the presentation by one of you on the Nap Bishop. When is it good enough? When do I say enough is enough? For me, it takes daily, hourly discernment. It takes friends and colleagues, mentors who believe in us and who can tell if the pursuit is causing harm. There are no simple answers in research, as you well know. There is so much good that can come from research. And sometimes that good is that the research was not quite up to par yet. I found a lot of hope in that story. I found a lot of guidance in that story. That is why I wanted to share it with you tonight. We do hope the very best for each one of you in your research here at Ball State University and in the potentially winding, bumpy path you will undertake. Thank you for your commitment to research. And in closing, we extend our deepest appreciation to the mentors of all of the 3 MT participants. Your commitment to excellence in graduate education here at Ball State is evident. Our best to each of you.